much for attending. We have a guest speaker today. Kirby Lee is one of the students that works with me in the Staff and Faculty Health and Wellbeing program, and she's going to present today. She can tell you a little bit about herself. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. Also, if you have just anything to add to the conversation, this is a pretty relaxed and casual presentation. So let's get started. Kirby, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. Like Linda said, my name is Kirby, and I will be your presenter for today. And I'm just going to be sharing with you a whole bunch of tips that you can hopefully make easy modifications to what you already do every single day in your kitchen. All right. Awesome. So of course, the main focus of today is to encourage everyone to eat healthier. And how I propose that we're going to do that is by making some small changes. So we're going to go over two sections today, where I'm going to introduce to you some healthier alternatives to ingredients that you might already use every single day. And also, I'm going to show you a few cooking methods, changes to your cooking methods that edge you a little bit closer to healthier eating. So like Linda said, if you have tried any of these ingredients or any of these cooking methods, please feel free to share any of your experiences, or if you have any recommendations about using them in the chat, and maybe we'll share it with everyone. Awesome. Okay. So first up, healthy ingredient swaps. This section of today's workshop is divided into 4 categories. First, we have grains, protein, dairy, then finally seasoning. So let's start with whole grains. So why am I talking about whole grains? The whole point of these alternatives is so you eat more of them. Whole grains can offer you a lot of fiber, antioxidants, healthy fats, and a whole bunch of vitamins and trace minerals. They can help maintain steady blood sugar levels, lower cholesterol, prevent heart and cardiovascular disease, and reduce risk of some cancer, and of course, move waste through the digestive tract. So for tip 1, white rice. In any meal that you would usually have with white rice or include white rice, I recommend that you try it with another whole grain. For me personally, I think brown rice, wild rice, or quinoa tend to be the easiest to swap in place of white rice, because their cooking methods are nearly identical. It's not like you're going ham and you have to, buy a new pan for this or that. And their textures and flavors are similar too. So they make a great whole grain alternative to white rice. All right, so tip 2. For breads, tortillas, pastas, and noodles, try your best to look for some whole grain alternatives. A lot of these products will have a stamp on them. The one at the top in the corner right there says 100%, and the one below that is 100% plus. They're the whole grain stamp from the Whole Grains Council, and the 100% stamp essentially means that all the grain ingredients in that product are made of whole grains, and there's a minimum requirement of 16 grams per serving, which is 1/3 of your daily recommended amount of 48 grams of whole grains. And the 50% plus stamp means that at least half of the grain ingredients are whole grain. And there's a minimum requirement of 8 grams, which is 1/6 of your daily recommended amount of whole grains. I didn't put it in here, but there's also a basic stamp that means that the product contains at least 8 grams of whole grain per serving, but the catch is that it may contain more refined grain than whole. Like it will have the 8 grams, but it'll have maybe like 20 grams of the refined grain. So if you're out looking for whole grain alternatives, keep an eye out for specifically these 2 stamps with 100% and the 50% plus. All right, and
real quick, before you move on, I think I may have interrupted you between tips 2 and 3. We have a question about recommendations for healthy grains. for folks who have celiac disease, so those who need to watch gluten. Any tips?
I think I'm gonna have to get back to you on that.
I could help a little bit. I know that rice, wheat, oats, and barley have, and of course, have gluten in them. So rice or wild rice, neither of those have gluten in them. And so you can get a lot of things made from those. It is a little bit processed when we make rice or a pasta from rice, but if you think about it, it's as processed when we make pasta from wheat. Also, things like garbanzo bean pasta. Has anybody ever had that? Or, you know, pasta that's made from the peas or that kind of stuff? That's a really interesting, an interesting kind of alternative as well. So you're avoiding those, the barley, the wheat, the oats, and the, yeah. It's kind of hard, but it's definitely doable. And I see a lot of folks are putting that into the chat box. Thank you so much, all of those suggestions.
Oh yeah, there are a lot. Awesome. Great, keep sharing. Love that. Okay. So tip 3, flours. If you are baking, try whole wheat flour, but make sure that it's for every like 1 cup of all-purpose flour that you use, you split it so it's half whole wheat and half all-purpose, just to prevent you from losing any of the functions that you would need in a flour. For example, like preserving the elasticity of the dough. If you're making bread, cohesiveness, things might fall apart, or it might have some trouble keeping air in. Again, bread example, or have any strange textures. So the half-half mix is the perfect ratio if you want to have more whole grains and less of the all-purpose. Any questions? Okay. So next is protein. So what is the point of these alternatives? So first, about red meats. So high consumption of red meats and processed meats can increase risks for heart disease, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and high cholesterol. So if you are a huge red meat lover, I suggest you to try and pick leaner cuts. Look for loin or round in the name when you're at the store. And if you're using ground beef for tacos, or if you're trying to include it in your pastas, look for something that has a smaller ratio of fat to lean. So 33 to 7 or 96 to 4. 96 to 4 is considered heart healthy. And then if you love bacon, which I do love bacon, try turkey bacon. It's a great alternative. So a step down from that, if you already do the lean red meats, you can maybe switch to white meats. Pick chicken breast, turkey, or ground turkey in place of ground beef. Or even try fish. And fish is absolutely great because it can offer some healthy omega-3 fatty acids without the saturated fats that you would get in red meat, while providing lots and lots of protein and a variety of nutrients along with it. And if you feel extra brave and exploratory, there are some plant-based alternatives that you can try. You can swap out your animal proteins with tofu, tempeh, seitan, mushrooms, or legumes. Personally, my favorite has always been tofu and mushrooms, but I also recommend seitan and tempeh. Seitan, if you don't know what it is made out of wheat gluten, which is what you get when you make dough, like bread dough or something like that, and you rinse away all the starch, and that's what you have left over, the gluten, the proteins inside that dough. And this is a product of that. You can get it in a variety of styles. You can get it ground, so it can replace like ground beef or ground turkey in slices, and this can be eaten raw. So you could put it in a sandwich hypothetically, but I think it's 100 times more delicious if you fry it up and brown it on a pan. And you can also get it in strips. Its texture is a little bit chewy and meat-like, and it tastes savory, mushroomy, almost like bland chicken, along those lines. And tempeh, it's similar to tofu. It is a fermented cooked, it's made out of fermented cooked soybeans, and it's usually formed into like a loaf, and then it's sliced. That's why you see um, that it's like a thicker square, it's sliced. It's got a less homogeneous texture. It's a little bit chunkier. There's got a little bits in there because it's less processed than the seitan, and it also has a stronger, nuttier, mushroomy flavor. Um, and I think you should probably keep that in mind based on how you want to swap that into your dishes. In cooking, both of them are pretty versatile. I think you cook them many ways. You can pan fry, you can grill, you can marinate them before you do either of that. You can put it in a sandwich, especially for seitan. And even like if you have the ground ones, add it to soup. But just as a warning, pay attention to the nutrition labels when you're purchasing them, because sometimes they might be hiding a lot of added salt or sugar. Yes.
So we do have a couple of questions here, Kirby. One person wanted to know, we talk about red meats, and red meat, we think of beef, but would you classify pork and lamb in the same kind of category?
I would.
Mm-hmm.
I would. So anything with the proteins that Linda just listed would be considered red meat. So again, I recommend finding a leaner cut, because a lot of these red proteins actually hide a lot of saturated fat, and a high consumption of saturated fat can contribute to high LDL cholesterol, quote unquote bad cholesterol levels, and potentially increased risks for heart disease. So yeah.
We also had someone comment that plant-based alternatives are the most unfamiliar to this person for cooking and substitutings. And when she sees a recipe, it's like almost easier to steer away from it.
Yeah.
So if you have any tips about, how to substitute them in for chicken, like, can you just substitute seitan that you've cut up like the same amount for the same amount of a meat?
So all of the plant-based alternatives, especially tofu and tempeh, I think that they have a more neutral flavor where you can add whatever flavors you want. I think if you're looking into, trying plant-based alternatives, start with the ones that have a little less flavor, because it's more flexible in how you can play around with it in the kitchen. I'm just going to talk about tofu. Instead of doing like chicken breast and salad, I coat the tofu in some cornstarch and fry it up in a pan so it's warm and you've got some of that Maillard reaction, that browning. Of course, you season it, right, with salt, pepper, whatever you usually season your chicken with, and then toss it in hot to your salad. That was how I started getting into tofu, like starting with something where it's an easy switch in and out. Now, instead of adding like pork or like beef or chicken into my fried rice, I would chop the tofu into small cubes, right? So changing the size and shape of it, and then frying that up and then adding it in there. It tastes delicious. It's going into that quinoa fried rice. I'm so excited for it later. Yeah, and mushrooms in pastas where you would have like, pasta is another thing you can easily hide these things. And if you have like a red pasta where it would usually have like a ground beef or some kind of protein in it, mushrooms actually go really well with those flavors. It's all about experimenting. Putting mushrooms in omelets, I've done that. That's delicious. Yeah, I think it's about assessing what dishes you cook every single day where you can easily add those flavors. Like instead of adding it to chicken, you're adding it to the more neutral flavored plant-based alternatives. And then experimenting. It takes a lot of experimenting because everybody has different taste buds. Everybody has a different way that they like to cook, or like time that they have to cook. That's what I recommend. For me, it was salads and I guess fried rice. that was most convenient for me to learn. But maybe start with like one dish and then experiment with the flavors, experiment with the texture and the cooking process.
Yeah, and seitan and tempeh, especially seitan, picks up the flavor of whatever you put with it. So it's like extremely versatile. I find YouTube videos like really helpful. So I like Google, YouTube for seitan or something. Lots of information out there. We did have a suggestion in the chat box that was a really good suggestion about she would love a class on easy switches, like taking this favorite recipe that you have that has meat, and how do you switch that up and make it plant-based? It's a great idea.
That's a wonderful idea. Yeah, I think you should definitely try it. If you see it at the market, touch it, hold it, see what you like about it, and maybe try it at home. It's always a first step. That first step is to just try it. All right. So next we have dairy. All right, so we've already talked a little bit about the saturated fat. Again, a high consumption of saturated fat can increase your cholesterol levels and increase your risks of heart disease. But to keep in mind, dairy obviously plays a lot of functions in cooking, and we don't want to lose that function. So these tips hopefully will preserve the function of the original ingredient. So first, milks and creamers. This is super easy. A matter of just picking something different off the shelf at the store. So pick a low-fat or non-fat milk alternative, or if you want to try something plant-based, oat milk is a great thing. Soy milk also has a lot more body, in my opinion. It has a little bit of a different flavor, but in coffees, I think it fades away. So oat milk, soy milk, almond milk, yeah, those are all alternatives that you can try. And cheeses. So I recommend picking low fat or part skim options, and pick stronger flavored cheeses. And the idea behind that is that if they taste stronger and they smell stronger, it forces you to use less of it, because it's so overpowering that if you put the same amount, it's just going to taste like cheese. So keep that in mind. And creams in cooking specifically. So in any recipe where, for example, if you're making like a creamy red sauce, you can definitely swap out like full fat cream with a splash of whole milk, or even half and half, which is like a dilution of cream. For recipes that need a thicker consistency, like if it's like a consistency kind of thing, that's the function of the cream. You can replace the cream with a cup of milk and some cornstarch or flour. You can make a roux, but you have to make sure that you pre-mix it so you don't get any weird lumps in your dish. You can also, specifically in soups, this works better in soups, is to use half a cup of Greek yogurt and dilute it with a little bit of milk. Yeah, I've tried that. That's actually okay.
So we do have a quick question here. When a recipe asked for cream, what are the alternatives? And you mentioned a few of them. Is there anything to really look out for?
Can you repeat the question?
Think of?
Sorry.
So, and this kind of makes me laugh, the person that wrote this, because I was really into figuring out ways to make a creamy Alfredo sauce. And I mean, a typical Alfredo sauce is whole cream, right? The heavy cream in a pan, and you reduce it and it gets thick and cheesy and all that. And I thought, I'm just going to use whole milk in that. Well, what I ended up with was curds and whey, because the protein coagulated and the liquid came out, and it was like, oh my gosh. So it made me want to offer the person that asked this question, if you're going to use, if the cream is a fairly large part of this recipe, it's one thing if it's a half a cup thrown in there to kind of add a little bit of creaminess. Make sure, like Kirby said, to use that roux, because I could make my nice Alfredo sauce with my whole milk as long as I used my fat and my flour, made a roux, and then stirred that milk in.
Yeah.
Which kind of defeats it a little bit because you're using fat in the roux, but you can alter the kind of fat. That's my experience I throw in there.
Yes. And the science behind that is that the cornstarch in the flour, it's like powdery, right? And it disperses into the dairy product and it keeps it from breaking. So you don't get the curds in the way. So it's a great alternative if you want to try that. And don't be afraid of fat. Just because we're limiting saturated fat, there are good fats that our body needs. We can't like completely eliminate fat from our diet. So it's not about being afraid of it. It's just being conscious of how much you take of the kinds that are harmful to you. Awesome. So butter and baking. Oh, I should probably talk. The reason why I don't really talk about creams and baking is because it requires whipping, like whipped cream. And it's kind of hard to recreate that at home. If I do find one, you might be hearing from me again. But I would suggest the switches for creams to reside mostly in the cooking category. Yeah, so butter and baking, since we're talking about baking. You can replace melted butter with canola oil or full fat, low fat Greek yogurt. That usually wouldn't disrupt the function of the fat in that recipe. In bread, pie crust, or biscuit specifically, you can replace 1 stick of butter with a 1/4 cup and 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And olive oil is great because it can offer you some of those good fats that I was talking about, heart healthy monounsaturated fats. And going back to Greek yogurt, I think Greek yogurt is a great alternative because it gives you that creaminess without having like the high amount of saturated fat, and it can offer you lots of protein and calcium as well. So consider trying out those. If you are using olive oil, be sure not to heat, like if you're baking it in the oven, make sure that recipe doesn't have you baking it past 375, which is its smoke point. It just makes the oil do funny things. So just avoid that.
We have a question about canola oil.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the participants has been reading that canola oil is not good to consume. Any thoughts around that?
So the reason why canola oil is mentioned here, in comparison with vegetable oil, canola oil is actually a degree less hydrogenated, which is where you would get trans fats, if you've heard of that. So between vegetable oil and canola oil, I recommend using canola oil because of the way the oil is made. Canola oil ends up having less, you run a lower risk of encountering trans fats, which is a bad fat. I'll just keep it at that, if that makes sense.
So one of the things that I've read about canola oil is that it's genetically modified. And so some people talk about the fact that they don't like it because of that. I don't know if that's what the participant was thinking about.
I don't know enough about canola oil, about genetically modified products, to give any word on that, but I can definitely look into it. Very interesting. A lot of oil like the saturated fat conversation, it's still quite disputed. But the reason why I recommend canola oil is because unlike olive oil, it has a higher smoke point. You can bake it at a higher temperature, which ends up being the case for a lot of baked goods. And yeah, it's a degree better than vegetable oil because of the way the fat molecules are in it are formed during the process of making it. If that makes sense. We good? Okay. So next up, we have seasoning. So we've already talked about the fat part, the saturated fat. Now we're going to talk a little bit about added salt and sugar. A high salt intake can actually lead to high blood pressure, and this in turn can increase risks for chronic kidney disease and cardiovascular disease, and in some cases, if you're eating a lot of salt, stomach cancer. And in terms of high sugar intake, it can also contribute to high blood pressure, but it can also contribute to weight gain, diabetes, fatty liver disease, and heart attacks. So that's why we're going to be talking about this. So first, obviously salt. Here, my first recommendation is to switch to kosher. In recipes where you're measuring it out in a like if they ask for half a teaspoon of salt, or stuff where you're measuring it out, there's like volume involved. I suggest switching to kosher salt, because kosher salt has a different size and shape than regular table salt, like the little grainy ones that you regularly shake onto your food. Kosher salt is they come in larger grains, and when you put them into like a measuring cup, they actually take up more space with less salt, because the irregular shape gives a lot of it expands the volume, so you're actually using less salt, and it you run a lower risk of over salting your dish. And another easy switch is to switch to low sodium soy sauce or low sodium chicken broth, staples in my kitchen. It's one of those things where you buy a different thing off the shelf. So those are very convenient. And of course, my recommendation is to actually experiment with more dry spices and herbs, so you're not relying on just salt for the flavor in your dish. So maybe, going to the store and picking out one seasoning and see what you can do with it. Buying a whole spice rack is a commitment. But I do recommend you trying it out, trying out what spices that you prefer, you like the flavor of, and wean off of depending on salt solely. Yes. And for sugar, you can incorporate sweetness into your dishes with natural sugars. A lot of your ingredients, like if you have fruit in that recipe or if you have vegetables in that recipe, you might they already kind of provide a little bit of that sweetness for you. So make sure you keep that in your consideration. Honey is a great way to add some natural sugars in, agave as well. Let's see, creamy dressings. So this is the fat part. You can switch to oil or Greek yogurt based dressing. So namely olive oil and Greek yogurt based dressing. So if you have ranch and you have some of those spices, you can recreate like a healthy version of ranch at home. And you can also add extra flavor with vinegars, balsamic. I've done rice wine vinegar with some dressings, like more Asian dressings. They taste great, again, with the spices and the herbs. And we always forget, but the fruits, fruit juice, lemon juice, or literally you could pop berries into a salad. I've done that. Or you can even add zest. So lemon zest, it'll give a really nice bright note. And it's super easy.
So Kirby, we have a conversation in the chat about liquid aminos.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've never tried it. I haven't had a chance to try it. Does anybody have anything to share about that? Because I can't see the chat.
Yeah, so somebody shared, they asked about them and asked about using them instead of soy sauce.
Mm-hmm.
I have done that before. I really
Yes.
like them. They're milder, so
Yeah.
you do get less of a dose of salt or sodium, and also they're gluten-free. If it's kind of the same as Tamurai, but
Mm-hmm.
because Tamurai is I believe, a gluten-free soy sauce. So it's probably closer to Tamurai than it is to soy sauce, but definitely a great seasoning.
It's a list. I should put that on my Christmas list. Someone's going to get me liquid aminos for Christmas. Okay. Any other questions? I can't see them still.
Oh, can you explain what is kosher salt and pink salt? Any ideas about those?
From my knowledge, kosher salt is actually really similar to regular table salt.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like the texture is different. It's like chipped into bigger pieces rather than the very fine, small stuff you get, in your regular shakers. I'm not quite sure about pink salt. I think pink salt has something to do with the production, and some of them also have flavoring. Linda,
Yeah. And the pink salt too, the salt mines in various places on the earth, deliver salts that are a little bit different in mineral composition.
Yeah.
And so the pink salt may have a little more or less of some of the other, minerals that accompany sodium. Does it have more minerals? I don't know. I wouldn't
Kosher?
say that it's the pink one.
Oh, the pink one.
I don't know that it's appreciable, but you know what I mean? Like it would amount to anything because we use such small amounts.
Yeah.
But I love pink salt.
It tastes great.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I should also put that on my Christmas list. A lot of things I'm realizing. Okay, so let's move on. So condiments. You can, if you're a fan of ketchup, which I am, I tried switching it with salsa one day and I actually liked it better. Salsa is, especially if you make salsa at home, it's got more fresh ingredients in it. You know what's going into it. And I think you get that tomatoey, sour, vinegary flavor without having any of the added sugar in ketchup. Another is relish. Not everybody's a fan of relish, but if you are, I suggest you switch it with just plain chopped pickles. So like buy a whole pickle and just chop it up because most relishes come in this sugary syrup that isn't quite necessary. You can also experiment with pesto, hummus, and chutney. A lot more fresh ingredients, right? And if you make it at home, you can also control how much salt, sugar, or fat, or whatever you're adding to it. You can even add spice. Hummus, spicy hummus is my favorite thing. I think that's a great thing that you should try. You can smear it on a sandwich. You can even smear pesto in a sandwich. I've had pesto in a salad. I think pesto is a great thing. That's why specifically I put a picture of pesto because pesto is my best friend. Chutney also gives a lot of brightness to your dishes. It's like a cilantro kind of flavor. It's like a salsa, but with lots of cilantro. Yeah. So I put some pictures of my personal favorite. I already talked about the chicken broth and the soy sauce. It's a super easy switch. I've talked about the pesto. Avocado is a great thing because it's a creamy, natural, it's a naturally creamy fruit, and you can smear it into sandwiches. Like it could be like a creamy base for whenever you have a creamy dressing or like a creamy sauce. You can also just slice it and put it into a salad. It's super versatile. It gives you some of those healthy fats that we were talking about earlier. So consider trying avocado.
We have someone mentioning in the chat that they use a Dash seasoning blend. It might be Mrs. Dash, but there's a lot of different seasoning blends in the Mrs. Dash lineup that are amazing. And then one of my favorites, I don't know if you've ever tried the Costco salt-free seasoning blend. I love that stuff.
Yes.
I mean, it has like dehydrated celery and dehydrated onions and carrots and
I was just going to say that. I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of the pre-mixed seasonings might actually hide some salt in it. So you definitely have to pay attention and read the back of the bottles before you purchase any of those seasoning mixes. But it's definitely findable, the ones that don't have added salt or sugar or whatever in it. So I recommend that you choose those, the ones that you can control how much salt you're adding to your dish. Yes. Okay. So moving on, now we're going to move on to some healthy cooking methods. This is divided into 4 different methods. And the first one we're going to go over is roasting and boiling. So cooking, the way you cook your food is just as important as what is going into your food. I'll start with that. So for this, tip 1 and tip 2 complement each other. So if you have like a meat recipe that requires the oven, use a broiling pan, roasting pan, or a cooling rack in like a rimmed baking tray. They will allow any excess fat to drip away through the little slots in the cooking surface. And then a lot of the times people who do this, they follow it with a reverse sear. So after you've cooked it in the oven and it's reached in like the proper internal temperature for the doneness that you want, or for the safe temperature for consumption, they take it out of the oven and they pop that piece of protein onto a really, really hot pan. So you get that crunchy crust, sear, char that, you know, we associate with lots of protein, steaks, pork chops. To complement that, like when you're letting those animal fats drip away, you can add some heart healthy fats. So like you can coat it with some olive oil. And you can also do this with veggies. It gives it a little bit of color too. And it helps trap some of that moisture and preserve some of that juiciness. So you don't get like a really dry piece of protein. It's a super convenient way of cooking veggies, especially, and proteins. If you're not like a super master at telling how cooked your proteins are, you get more control over how you cook your proteins. Okay. Moving on. Okay. So this method, steaming and modified microwaving, sounds funny, but it is meant to preserve more of the nutrients in your veggies. So especially the green ones, the pigments that are naturally occurring, pigments are essentially stuff, chemical compounds that are natural. They happen naturally, and they give color to your fruits and vegetables and fungi. And eating more of these pigments is actually good for you. It can increase anti-inflammatory activity, reduce oxidative stress, support your immune system, and even help fight diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So it's obviously great to have more of these. But to fully take advantage of these pigments for its health benefits, you should consider how you cook your food. And steaming is a useful cooking method for this because unlike blanching, like blanching vegetables, it doesn't raise the risk of leaching out any of the water-soluble pigments from the vegetables into the water that it's being cooked in. So like if you've ever blanched broccoli, sometimes if you blanch it for too long, the water, like you take out the broccoli and the water is kind of yellow, the pigments have leached out into the cooking solution. So we're trying to avoid that. Steaming essentially cooks your veggies while still preserving some of the nutrients and the pigments that are good for you, right? So traditional steaming, all you have to do is really cut your hard vegetables. I personally use hard vegetables. You can also use it with some soft vegetables into more uniform, equally sized pieces. And then you bring water to a boil. Make sure it's at a boil before you add your veggies into the steamer basket, and you let the water boil and continue producing steam, and you let it cover in steam for about 5 to 8 minutes, or until you check it with a fork and it's the texture that you want, and then season and then serve. So that's super simple. If you're in a pinch, you can try microwave steaming. So you do the same thing, you cut everything into the uniform pieces, and then you put it into a microwave safe bowl, and then add water and cover it with a lid or a wet towel to trap some of that moisture in, and then microwave for 3 to 6 minutes or until it's the texture that you want. You just got to keep checking it. And then make sure to drain any leftover water. It's always good to have a little bit extra water than less in this method, so you don't run out of steam, right? Drain anything, season, and serve. And in the picture right there, you can see a steaming basket. It's a great investment, I think. You can find one that can fit into many different size pots, and it's an easy removal and serving. So I do recommend that for traditional steaming. If, I know some people prefer to blanch, if you do blanch, just make sure you use a higher volume of water, so more water than veggies, and make sure it's boiling, like actively boiling before you add any veggies in, and don't leave it in for too long. So it's just like a flash blanch, keep the time in the water as short as possible. Yeah. Any questions? No? Awesome.
We did just have a question pop up.
What's up?
For the microwave, do you have to get the water to a boil first, or you just throw the whole thing in for 3 to 6 minutes?
So you would put everything in your veggies into a bowl, your cut veggies, right? And then I would say, based on like your bowl, have maybe enough water to coat the bottom, a good 0.5 centimeter, depending on how many veggies or what kind of bowl you have. It's better to have a little extra water, like I said, so it continues steaming while it's microwaving. But no, it does not have to go in like scorching hot, I don't think. Yeah. Awesome. Moving on. Modified stir frying and sauteing. So for tip one, we want to minimize the oil that you're using, but not not sacrificing the color and the flavor that you would get, the texture that you would get with the oil in your dish. So this tip has you adding 25 to 50% less oil, depending on what dish that you're making, into a really good nonstick pan. It's so important to have a really good nonstick pan. And before you toss any food in, you make sure you allow the pan to get really, really hot so you can get the browning that you want. So yes, you can get the crispness and the browning without any additional oil. Tip two is to add moisture. Don't be afraid to add a splash of water or broth, the low sodium broth, if you want to try it, to deglaze your pan. So unstick any of the good flavors that have formulated and stuck to the bottom of your pan. And so that you can allow your food to cook through a little bit more. So sometimes if you're stir frying veggies, that initial amount of oil is just not enough, and it cooks to nothing and your pan is super dry. So to liven that up, you can add a splash of water, and it actually provides a little bit of steam to get your food cooking faster, right? And the last tip is to lower your heat when you're seasoning with water-based seasoning. So if you have soy sauce, lower your heat to the lowest setting, because there's going to be residual heat in your pan before you add your soy sauce, because a lot of people rely on soy sauce or oyster sauce, a lot of the Asian dishes, with more sauce, like water, liquid, viscous sauces, and they cook away really fast in a hot pan, and you end up adding more to get that same glisten or that same appearance that you're looking for. So turning down your heat ensures that not all of that will be cooked off, and you get a juicier and glossier final product, and that prevents you from over seasoning. Yeah, and that gorgeous picture of stir fry right there.
Kirby, do you have any recommendations for a non-stick pan? Teflon, but Teflon's not good for us.
I don't know the materials by heart. I think that's something I need to look into.
I have one of those that has gold on it. It's not real gold, but maybe it's a copper color.
Yeah.
But it's starting to wear out. So I wonder where all that copper went to, if it was real copper.
Yeah, I have a really good one. I just don't know what the coating is specifically called.
We'll see if we can find that.
Yeah, but if you can do some research, yeah, definitely find a good one, because it can drastically lessen the amount of oil that you're using. I know my family uses a really old pan that no longer sticks, so to counteract that, they add a lot more oil. So yeah, consider the good nonstick pan.
Yeah, cast iron skillet is populating the chat box.
Yeah,
I have trouble. I couldn't get mine seasoned. Yeah, boy, cast iron is a favorite.
yeah.
Oof. Maybe I need to work on that harder.
Yeah. Any other questions? Nope.
Okay. I don't think so.
All right, moving on. So for this last slide, this is to prevent over seasoning. So for tip one, season from up high. So sprinkle your seasoning from higher up above the pan, and this actually distributes your seasoning more evenly. As you can see, the gentleman here, he's holding it really high, and you can see that the specks of salt are really far apart, and that's what you want. And the reasoning behind this is that if you don't season evenly, you end up with a really seasoned spot in your dish and a really under-seasoned spot in your dish. And sometimes, even though you mix it, it just never really evens out because it's stuck to your food. And if you happen to taste the under-seasoned spot, you'll feel inclined to add more seasoning, and now you've added most likely more seasoning than you needed. So just from the get-go, trying to get it distributed is a great tip, so you can get an accurate reading when you're taste testing your dish. And we've talked a little bit about this already, but pay attention to your ingredients. So be aware of any existing sugar or saltiness in your ingredients that you've added before. So you don't have to, sometimes you just don't have to add that extra pinch of salt or pinch of sugar, because maybe you had a really savory protein, or like you had a really sweet ingredient that was added before. So it saves you an extra step if there's already some existing flavor in that. And of course, I think you hear this all the time, you can always add more. It's better to add less and taste it before you add more. A lot of recipes, they kind of eyeball the seasoning, especially for salt and sugar. And everybody has a different flavor palette and different preference for how salty or sugary that they want their dish to be. So I recommend just maybe even doing a quarter. I usually do a quarter at a time of what they recommend in a recipe, and then taste it between each one, make sure it's distributed evenly, and then stop when I feel like it's it's to my liking. So it's easier to add more than to take out. And of course, like I've been saying, taste as you go. So I always have a spoon out, or a chopstick, or whatever, a fork by my cooking station, so it's convenient for me to check the seasoning of my food. And yeah, and it's always good to be aware of where your seasoning levels are, so you don't think that it's not, because I didn't add any salt to it, it's going to be bland. It's always good to taste it before you actually start seasoning, so you know where you're starting and know where you want to end. Yes, so that is all I have for you today. I hope you learned something today, and I wish you luck if you're going to experiment. I really hope you experiment. It always takes a little bit of experimenting. And if you would like to contact us, or if you have any additional questions, you can email us at that email, or check out our website. If you have any questions, or if you have any experiences you want to share, please leave it in the chat. You guys have already been greatly active, which has been wonderful. Yeah. Or you can unmute. That's great too.
Thank you so much, Kirby, for that wonderful information. So Kirby and I will hang around for a few minutes. You guys will all receive a survey after this, after we close out this session, so you can give us feedback and any suggestions you have for future programming.